Right, welcome back. So we're going to go ahead and focus on how do we measure intelligence now that the psychometric approach has been described along with Charles Spearman and Cattell and Horn. Now we're going to focus on how they went about trying to measure intelligence, which morphs eventually into today's modern intelligence testing. So I will tell you that I am a historian in the area of school psychology, and we do an awful lot of intelligence testing, so it's all I can do to kind of rein in my enthusiasm for this particular area. But I'll start with the story of how they came about with the first intelligence test. And so the French school system basically had a problem. They had a variety of students that in their now public education that had a wide range of skill sets. And they didn't feel it was a very efficient way of going about and educating their kids because you had such a wide range in an individual classroom. And so what they decided to do is to task Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon, or Binet and Simon in the early 1900s, to go ahead and develop a test that can reliably sort children into different age, not age graded, but ability graded kind of classrooms, and therefore they could use their schooling and resources to the best. And so what Binet and Simon did is created a list of different items that they could go ahead and tell each child and measure at what age some of these different ones would come out best. And so I'm going to give an easy one. So let's say 2 plus 4 equals. So if we go ahead and do 2 plus 4 equals, and we give this to all these children, some who are 4 years old, some 5 years old, some 6 years old. And at some point in that process, it's going to go from most of the kids getting it wrong to most of the kids getting it right. So let's say that age is between the ages of 5 and 6. When you have 5-year-olds, you say only 20% get those right, 2 plus 4. But 6-year-olds, 80% get that right. And so what you would do then is say that if you get 2 plus 4 right, then you have the equivalent of a mental age of a 6-year-old, because that's what most 6-year-olds are able to do, even if you're 5 years old. Okay? And so this concept of mental age was the very first thing that Binet and Simon came up with, and it was all based on items and how difficult it was for some children to solve at a certain age. Now, you may remember I also talked about Jean Piaget worked for Binet and Simon as they were developing this test and really sparked his interest in why children answer the questions the way that they do. So, inadvertently, the study or trying to do intelligence theory is one of the things that inspired one of the most significant cognitive developmental theorists that we have in the field. And so Binet and Simon had this French intelligence test for quite a while, and people began to translate that test and bring it on over the United States. One of the more famous people to do this, his name was Louis Terman, and about, say 10, 15 years after Binet and Simon developed their test, he created something called the Stanford-Binet scale. Now, I think from a job placement standpoint, Terman was very, very wise in the fact that he named it after the university he worked at, with the being Stanford. Don't know what happened to poor Simon. He just kind of got the shaft in regards to the naming because it's ever been the Binet Simon, the Stanford Binet scale ever since in the United States. So one of the things that Louis Terman did to improve on the intelligence test was to introduce the concept called an intelligence quotient, or IQ. Okay, so let's go here real quickly. I realize I got a little behind on the slides. We just talked about the Binet-Simon test and age-graded items along with their mental age, and then the modern Stanford-Binet scales that Louis Terman is developing. And the intelligence quotient, the formula as you can see there is a simple mathematical one. IQ, or intelligence quotient, is equal to MA, or mental age, divided by CA, chronological age, times 100. So let's start with an easy one. You have a child who is 6 years old chronologically and has a 6-year-old mental age. So 6 divided by 6 is 1, times 100 is 100. And 100 is the average of an IQ score. So you could go to another extreme where let's say you have a 5-year-old who, chronological age, who has a mental age of a 10-year-old. In that case, using the formula, you would have a child with a 200 IQ, which is quite rare indeed. And so what we see here is a gradual evolution of this whole idea of IQ testing and what is IQ. Now, this formula that I have up here is the first formula of how they originally did it. They do not use that to form IQ anymore. Rather, what they use is something called test norms. And test norms are based on what they call a normal distribution or a bell-shaped curve, meaning that you have most scores, in this case around 100, kind of clustered in the middle. And then as you go towards the ends, as that begins to decrease, you get fewer and fewer people. So IQs of 70 or 130 above or below are pretty rare. And we'll get into more details on that in a minute. So the Stanford-Binet scales are still around. They believe they're in their 3rd or 4th edition. But you also had another person come around named David Wechsler, and we'll talk about some of his items in a second. But I want you to get a flavor first for what an IQ test might look like if you've never had one given to you before. And believe me, it's a little more challenging than probably what you're going to find online or on the internet when they say test your IQ. Those can be nice, fun, and games, but that's not what's used in the professional fields. So you can see here on this slide, looking at a few items, you have different verbal items and nonverbal items. So the first item there is, what does telephone mean? And so maybe kind of interesting to see what telephone means to today's youth, but that used to be a pretty straightforward question. Another question would be, an inch is short, a mile is, and the answer being long. That would be an example of a verbal analogy. And then we have more verbal reasoning. So something like, what's wrong with this story? One day we saw several icebergs that had been entirely melted by the warmth of the Gulf Stream. Of course, the problem then is, how can you see an iceberg if it's been entirely melted by the Gulf Stream? Number series, so what number comes next, as you can see there. The answer, with the problem, we get 5, 7, 6, 9, 8. I'm going to embarrass myself here. I'm going to say 11 offhand. And then we also have arithmetic reasoning, which is your old faithful math problems. If I buy 6 cents worth of candy and give the clerks 25 cents back, I would get, and the answer here, 19 cents back in change. So these are all very verbally related skills, as you can tell. I'm quite heavy in that. Now, the next set is these nonverbal skills. And what you see with nonverbal, picture oddities there, which picture does not belong with the others. In this case, the spoon, putting together puzzle pieces, or putting things in order that you would assume to see them in a series. Kind of like if you cut up a comic and ask, like, what order would those go in? Okay, so we talked about Binet and Simon developing the first French intelligence test, Lewis Terman translating that and bringing it over to the US to call it the Stanford-Binet scale. And then we have another person that has greatly contributed, and that's David Wechsler. That's him out there. And he created a series of intelligence tests for various ages. And these may be some of the more common ones if you ever do run into someone giving you an official IQ test that they may administer. So for younger children, you have something called the Wechsler Preschool and Primary Scale of Intelligence, or the WIPSI. It's in its 4th edition, and it's for children ages 3 to 8. Don't worry about memorizing the full names of these. It's just to better get an idea that David Wechsler has a variety of these that can be administered for all ranges of the lifespan. Your next one is the WISC-5, or the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, 5th edition. And this is ages 6 to 16, which is why you'll see the WISC usually used in most public schools, starting in elementary school, going all the way up to early high school. And then finally, you have the WAIST-4, which is for the adults going on. Okay. So for the Wechsler IQ scores, they're going to use a normal distribution and a full-scale score, as you can see here with the bell-shaped curve. So hang on for the next module. We'll explain more about the bell-shaped curve.